In our video about the most important inventions in history, a lot of you commented to make a video about the most important inventions throughout ancient history. So let's get to that. Let's start off with 3000 years before Christ. The first type of paper was created in ancient Egypt 3000 BC. Ancient Egyptians used a type of plant called the papyrus, and they weaved them together in a very thin slice and created a very thin sheet of paper where they could write with. They would use an old school type of pen where you put an ink, which you see to this day, and they could write on it with hieroglyphics. It's so amazing because this type of paper and these writings still remain to this day, but they were kept in a very safe environment, like a grave or somebody's tomb next to a mummy, which is why they survived 5,000 years. If they were left out in the elements, they would never be in good condition. Let's go look at another ancient invention, the calendar. The first respectable calendar that was somewhat correct was made by the Sumerians. This calendar was somewhat accurate in a way that it had 12 months, and each month had 29 or 30 days. This calendar was made 3100 years before Christ. This type of calendar very quickly goes around the world, and from China all the way to Europe, people are using this type of calendar and they're editing it. But when you get to the year 1000, Omar Khayyam, the Persian scientist, perfects the calendar and creates the most accurate calendar in history, the Jalali calendar. Let's look at another invention that's very mysterious. Mysterious in a way that nobody knows where and who invented this. The wheel. The wheel has been around for an extremely long time, and since they were usually made from cobblestone or wood, they didn't really survive in history. The first type of record we have that was made by a civilization, the wheel was made by the Sumerians. But by the look of it, it's very obvious that the wheel had been around for a long time before that, so you really can't put a date on it. Wood is not a good thing to keep throughout history because they could very easily get destroyed. But when you get to the Bronze Age, a lot of wheels were made from bronze, which remain to this day. Either way, it was an invention that truly changed the world. The wheel gets more and more advanced every day until you get to the Industrial Revolution. And that's when it exponentially grows and gets better and better. For thousands of years, it continued to advance, but after the Industrial Revolution, it truly advanced and there's nothing like it anymore. But let's go look at another invention. An invention that the inventor is clear. Cleisthenes, that created democracy. Democracy basically means power to the people, where the government is the people by voting. But the way of the Greeks, it was pretty funny because it wasn't the people. It was only male landowners. They had plenty of slaves that weren't counted as humans. And if you didn't own any land, you couldn't vote. So you weren't counted as a real human. If someone spoke against the government, they would be executed. Like Socrates was telling the people of Greece to start thinking and stop acting like a slave to these owners. But for telling the normal person to think, the Greek government decided to execute him. Another important invention in history is concrete, that was created in 27 BC during the reign of Emperor Augustus of the Roman Empire. If you've seen our video about the Colosseum, just note that this structure uses this type of Roman concrete, which uses limestone, sand, and a mixture of other types of materials that makes it a strong bond. The Romans kept this formula extremely secret, so the other empires didn't get it. But it seems like they weren't that careful, because a few centuries later, the Sasanian Persian Empire got their hands on this type of concrete, because they also mixed limestone, bricks, and ash together and created sarouj, which was very similar to Roman concrete. But let's go to the very eastern part of the world, in Korea, and let's see what they created. The first type of central heating system was made by the Koreans, where they would build a building And underneath the building, they would build these special channels where they can put wood stoves and they could keep adding firewood to keep that environment under there warm. This would basically create a warm area underneath the house, warming up the entire building. This was amazing because Korea is extremely cold and something like this is useful, which is why it made its way all the way to Greek and Egypt. But thousands of years later, when it gets to the Romans, they make fun of it. They believe that it's an extremely stupid thing to build something like this and go through all this hassle, while you can just put a fireplace inside the building and get warm. The next ancient invention is wine. Wine was created around 7,000 years ago in modern-day Georgia. Wine was an important invention throughout history, especially for places that did not have clean water, and they would drink the wine instead of water so they don't get sick. After the invention of wine, it very quickly disperses all over the world from China all the way to Europe. The next important invention in history is the qanat. The qanat is an ancient Persian invention that would fulfill the need of water in a dry place, like Iran. In the lower parts of the mountains, they would create these wells, and from underneath, they would connect these wells together. And that means all the water that was inside these wells would flow through the bottom shaft all the way to flat land. And you could use that part of the flat land for anything like farming or a town. So you would always have fresh water down there, which was amazing. For the next invention, we have to go very much back in time, around 100,000 years ago, and see where clothes came from. Clothes are extremely ancient because even Neanderthals wore them. And it's very obvious what they were made of. They were made from animal skin that the person had just killed, and it was always to keep them warm. But when you get to the civilization era, the humans took this clothing and made it more stylish and better looking, rather than just keeping you warm. Let's go to the next ancient invention. Different types of plates and bowls. The most ancient bowl that was made from a special type of clay in ancient China around 20,000 years ago. It's very obvious that they used a type of clay. They put it in fire and cooked it so it stays that way. So they knew about pottery 20,000 years ago, or maybe even beforehand. When you move forward, especially when you get to the Bronze Age, different types of pots and pans turn into bronze. But it's not like people forgot about these chinas or porcelain. The history of porcelain or china itself is very interesting, because around 1600 BC, during the Shang Dynasty, the Chinese would create these porcelain different types of pots and pans, and they were so high quality that throughout the world they started calling it China, which remains to this day. The next invention is writing. The first ever type of language that actually had a writing was Sumerian script, which was basically pictures that explained something. The same type of language turned into hieroglyphics, which is used by the Persians and the Egyptians. You have to know that in the Middle East, you have two different types of languages, which remains to this day. You have Semitic languages and non-Semitic languages. Like the language Hebrew, Akkadian, or Arabic is Semitic languages, and the ancient Persian, Sumerian, and modern-day Farsi is a non-Semitic language. Since we're in the old times, let's look at an ancient warrior tactic that changed the world. The first Persian Empire, called the Achaemenid Persian Empire, which was a global superpower at its time, designed a tactic called the Arabe. With this type of tool, they would put two horses up front with all types of blades all over it, especially on the wheels. So in the beginning of the war, these types of horses would go into the stomach of the opposition, and when the horse slammed into all these people, they would be eliminated immediately. And this is the reason Cyrus the Great could take over the entire world at that time in a very short period of time. But let's go to the Americans and see what the Mayans and the Aztecs invented thousands of years ago. The Aztecs and the Mayans were the very first people to use cacao and made chocolate. But it's not the chocolate you and I know today that tastes very good. This is a very bitter type of chocolate and it was only used for medicine. Cacao is actually very good as a medicine and it's very healthy, but when you add all that sugar and make it taste good, it's not very good anymore. Last but not least, let's look at the most ancient animation in the world. In the Shahr-e-Sukh in Iran, there is a pottery that creates an animation. When you spin this pot around, there is a type of goat that keeps jumping on a tree branch and jumping off. And when you put it all together, this is how it looks like. Inventions like the wheel were extremely effective, but they're so ancient that nobody truly knows where it was made, what year it was made, and who made it. So that's why we're gonna look at relatively modern inventions, where we know what year and where they were invented. We'll start off from back in the day. In the year 1450, a simple invention literally changed the world. An invention by a German named Johannes Gutenberg. He invented the printing press. The reason this invention was so effective was pretty obvious, because before the invention of the printing press, every single writing and book was written by hand. But all of a sudden, Gutenberg's invention made books easier to access and much cheaper. So it wasn't just the wealthy people that could afford something to read, and this raised the literacy rate around the world. You guys already know what stage of printing press we are now. Books are so cheap and accessible that everyone has access to it, and the literacy rate around the world has been the highest it has ever been throughout history. And it all started with Johannes Gutenberg's invention in the year 1450. The next invention we want to look at is the lamp. Of course, everybody knows the lamp is invented by Thomas Edison, but some people say no, it was Nikola Tesla. But the official inventor is Thomas Edison. Edison invented the lamp in the year 1879. Beforehand, the only light you could create was from candles and kerosene lamps. Before the invention of lamp, kerosene lamps were everywhere. And one person which you should know about gained a lot of money because of this. John D. Rockefeller, because of the company Standard Oil. He was the #1 oil producer in the world for many decades, and it was all because of kerosene lamps. But Edison, with the invention of the lamp, stops kerosene lamps. But this wasn't really concerning for John D. Rockefeller, because he had an insane empire by this time. And it wasn't like the lamps were amazing from the beginning. First of all, you had to run wires through the city so you can have electricity in an area where you want a lamp. So before you put up that foundation and structure to have lamps around the house, that was already taking decades. So kerosene lamps were being used for decades even after the invention of the lamp. It is finally in the 20th century where lamps are becoming common, and that's only in the main cities around the world, especially the US. And decade after decade, you have electricity lines ran through normal cities and villages where you have lamps, but that took many decades. Let's go to the next effective invention. 6 years after the invention of the light bulb, meaning in the year 1885, the first automobile was invented by a gentleman named Carl Benz. After inventing the automobile, Carl Benz wasn't impressed with his own invention, but his wife was, which is why she became the very first driver in history, because she took this automobile to town and showed the people. Let's go to the next invention, the telephone. Before the invention of the telephone, telegraph was the #1 invention. Telegraph was probably the most important equipment for decades for many countries, especially through the Civil War. But telephone literally demolished the telegraph. But just like the light bulb, it didn't do it right away. It took many years for it to be done just right, so it's actually effective. In the year 1876, a Scottish inventor by the name of Alexander Graham Bell invented the first telephone. Before even beginning on this invention, Alexander believed that you could send voices through wires. And of course, some people would laugh at that. It's like, what do you mean? Are you a magician or something? He eventually was successful and invented it and named it the harmonic telegraph. He finally sent a voice through wire, but it wasn't like the wire was very far away. It was in his office to the next room, and he was trying to send his voice through this wire to the next room. Alexander had an assistant named Thomas Watson, and he would tell him to go to the other side of the wire and see if he can hear the voice. The first ever sentence spoken through a telephone was, "Mr. Watson, come here." The least you could say is that Alexander was surprised that Watson actually heard his voice through the wire, and he actually came into the office because of that. This was the day the telephone was invented. And just like anything else, it started to advance and get better and better, and you see it everywhere in the world. Another very effective invention was the radio, and they say it's invented by this guy, Marconi. But a lot of people disagree and say Nikola Tesla invented it and Marconi stole it. But just like Thomas Edison, it is Marconi's name on the invention. You might say, who cares about the radio? It's not even important anymore. But this was the first time that you could send a signal that didn't require wires. And after this, in a very short span of time, it connected the entire world without a wire. One of the most effective and underrated inventions in history is this, the tractor. A machine that revolutionized farming. Before the tractor, farming was extremely difficult and it took much longer, a lot more labor, and the lands were quite small, so the produce was much lower than ever before. The inventor of the tractor was a man named John Froelich that was born in Iowa. Even though John was not a farmer and his family wasn't, but he was in the state of Iowa where there's a lot of farmers around him, especially farming corn and potatoes. So he was always around these farmers and he saw how difficult their life is. Even though there were a lot of farmers in this state, but the land was small and the produce was very low, and sometimes there was a shortage in some seasons. John finally goes off to college, and even though his major wasn't engineering or any type of mechanics, but he loved mechanical things because he's growing up through the Industrial Revolution and all these machines are around him. He finishes school and goes back home next to the farmers he grew up around. He's still continuing to watch these farmers struggle and work extremely hard for a little bit of food. So through his mind, he's always thinking of ways to make these guys' life easier. John gets a job at a blacksmith, and he always tries to invent different things to make a farmer's job easier. Maybe an attachment for the cow, maybe a tool, but none of them was truly successful. When you get to the year 1892 and John is only 43 years old, he gets familiar with a machine called the automobile. And he basically takes this idea and turns it into an equipment that could be used as an off-road vehicle and used as something where you can haul around the farm and make your job easier. This machine didn't only help the farmers out and it made their lives easier, but it actually helped the world out because the production raised drastically. Farmlands got bigger, it got much easier, and when you have a lot more produce, you have a lot less people that are starving. And that's why the tractor is on the list as one of the most effective inventions in history. We talk about all types of transportations like the car and the automobile. But we want to go around the world and ships are too dang slow. We need something that could fly through the air. Yes, the airplane. In the year 1903, the Wright brothers flew the very first airplane. And the least you could say, it changed the world in 1 year. Because after watching the Wright brothers succeed in this type of invention, anybody that was a type of engineer or a mechanic tried to build their own airplane. And of course, the most famous ones out of those people were the creators of Lockheed and Boeing. So many people got their hands in airplane designing that the industry started to grow much faster than any other industry, like the automobile.
And one of the reasons was that different governments were investing a whole lot of money in the airplane industry because it was such an effective tool and they wanted it for their military. So that's why when you get to World War I, even though the invention of the airplane is barely 10 years old, but they're much more advanced than the ones in the year 1904. And when you get to after World War II and the Cold War begins, the speed of advancement in airplane technology and every other industry speeds up by a ton, because the Russians would create something and then the Americans had to top that, and it went back and forth, and this caused the world to advance in a very short period of time. But a lot of people say that after the Cold War was over in the year 1991, the speed of advance has slowed down by a ton. If this was the case, maybe Lockheed Martin's best airplane wasn't the F-35, it was the F-99, or the Soviets had the Su-97. As you know, militaries around the world have a huge budget, especially the US. And one of those inventions is letting me speak through the mic and you guys can hear it. The internet. Two scientists named Bob Kahn and Vinton Kirk were scientists in the University of Los Angeles, and they were appointed by the Department of Defense, meaning the Pentagon, to create such thing, and they finally were successful in the year 1973. This was the year the internet was first invented. It wasn't the internet that we all know, but it allowed different computers to connect without wires, and this was the beginning of it all. But many years after this, meaning 20 years, in the year 1993, the World Wide Web, or the internet we know today, was introduced to the world. A lot of fans of conspiracy theories believe that the Americans were waiting for the Soviet Union to collapse to introduce the internet to the world, because beforehand they didn't want such a powerful nation to have access to such a strong tool. Last but not least, we want to talk about an invention that allowed cars to be possible and to have speeds like this, the asphalt. This is Newark, New Jersey, the city that had the first ever asphalt road in history. And this is in the year 1870, before the automobile was invented. An American chemist by the name of Edward Smith, he mixed a lot of different chemicals, including oil and cement together, and he created the first ever asphalt. You might say you would put concrete as the road, but this wouldn't work out either way, because the asphalt is much smoother and more durable in long term. The inventions we introduced to you guys in this video are known as the most effective and important inventions through history, and let us know if we missed some.